Well, thank you everybody for joining. Maybe a few more people might join us. I disabled the waiting room, so people should be able to join if they're coming in. I know, I think there were really only 15 or 16 people that could make it. It's a small group. And this is our first ever roundtable. So we'll see how it goes. I know this is a busy time of year for people, but I'd love to try and do it again. So I am recording tonight. I hope that's okay with everybody. It's something we hope to make available maybe on our website or potentially for, other site coordinators with a link, but I think it might be helpful for other people to watch at a later time. I'm Julie Brown. I think I know most of you, but a couple new names. I am the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMANA and have been with the organization for 13 years this month. And a big part of what I do is staying in touch with all of you, with the monitoring network, staying in touch and kind of helping set up new sites and offer support with data issues and providing resources to sites and kind of prepping data sets before RPI analyses. And I also do a lot of administrative stuff. So just website stuff with HMANA and marketing, fundraising, processing orders that come in, that kind of thing. A little bit of everything. And when I'm not working at HMANA, I am in the fall, I help run the HawkCount Hawk Watch with my husband, Phil, who's also here tonight. And I've been working there or was the counter there starting in 2005. And now I'm just kind of a relief counter. And Phil is actually the site coordinator. That's where I met my husband, Phil, on top of that mountain. So yeah, before we jump in, I should say that this idea of a forum and getting together or a roundtable has been in the works really for many years. It's something we've wanted to do for a while and just couldn't find the right time. But I think it's really important to just have some more regular communication between the sites and get some dialogue going with the monitoring network and hear some of your thoughts, some major challenges, concerns you have. And I know some sites already do this. We have the Kittatinny Roundtable, which is an annual event every summer down at Hawk Mountain. And a couple loose groups in the Northeast get together, I know, with some gatherings at the end of their season. But I'd love it to become an annual event if it goes well. Even just checking in to, say how your season went or talk about a few species trends like they do at the Kittatinny Roundtable, share ideas and just talk about challenges you're facing. So I know from speaking for HMANA, we really want to know how things are going and how we can better help sites. And even if, we don't have all the answers to maybe some of the major challenges sites are facing, it's a great way to just get the discussion going. So this is a small group and we'll see if we can get it to grow in the future. We have 3 more roundtables this week and next week for the different regions. And yeah, Zoom, I feel like just makes things really easy nowadays. Before COVID, I was thinking of planning some regional gatherings in person, and now, Zoom makes things pretty easy. So maybe, potentially we could aim for a different time of year. Maybe January, February might be better for spring and fall sites, and we get more participation. So just a couple basic guidelines with Zoom. I think you guys are probably familiar with Zoom as I am. I spend a lot of time on Zoom these days, but we'll try and keep conversations on topic and relevant. You can, it's a pretty small group, but you can choose to stay muted if you have a lot of background noise, unless you're talking. And I think it's a small enough crowd that we could probably go around and introduce ourselves before jumping in, and maybe keep it to 1 minute tops. Just tell the group your name, what Hawkwatch you are joining from, maybe what role what role you have at your local Hawkwatch, and what you hope to get out of this session tonight. So maybe I will start on my screen. Carolyn, you're up at the top there, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Hoffman. I'm editor of Hawk Migration Studies, and I'm on the board of HMANA. I learned to hawk watch at Hawk Mountain. Now I do nearly all of my hawk watching at Wagner's Gap. What to me, one of the best things about being editor of Hawk Migration Studies is I get to go to Laurie's Kittatinny Roundtable every summer. And to me, that's just like the most fun you can have in the summer with hawks, and talk to people. We don't usually see each other because we're on our own sites, so we don't get together too often. So the roundtables I always found is a great way to get to know people better and hear what they want to talk about and what's going on at their sites.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Pamela, how about you?
Okay. Hey, everybody. I'm Pam Peters. I'm a volunteer counter at the Franklin Mountain Hawk Watch, which is in the northern Catskills of New York. So I've been there about 6 years or so, but I've been a birder all my life. And Tom Salo, some of you may know, and Andy Mason co-founded the Hawk Watch, 1989 or so. So it's got good long history of data. I don't know what else you might want to know. I sent you a bunch of questions, so I guess we'll get to those.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Todd, thanks for joining us. Go ahead.
Todd Watts. I'm the official counter at Greenlaw Mountain up in New Brunswick, Canada. Been here from the start, 14 years. So we're getting a good amount of data built up. Not sure what else to say. We're the northeasternmost watch site, if anyone's not familiar with us.
Yeah, we're always watching your numbers, Todd, down at Pac-Monadnock. So thanks for joining.
Me too. I love reading your reports, Todd.
Which watch was that again?
Greenlaw Mountain.
Okay, thanks.
Before I continue, I just wanted to mention that we're having a lot of rain and wind here where I am in New Hampshire. And I've made a couple people, Paul Roberts and Phil Brown, co-hosts. So if I drop off, I will get back on as soon as I can. How about you, David Babington?
David Babington, Chestnut Hill Hawk Watch in Litchfield, Connecticut. I've been doing the data input since 1999, and started getting interested in hawks when I lived in New Jersey, and I'd go to the Montclair Hawk Watch. Did go to Hawk Mountain once on a very poor day, and I made some comment, I hope a kestrel comes by at least, and a kestrel then came by, of course. And I've been to Cape May Hawk Watch, some in the West, and I find we're just a broadwing hawk watch site, and so that's what there's just two other people that really are full-time in terms of coming and doing that. And my eyes have gone downhill over the years, and I'm glad those two ladies are at the Hawk Watch a lot.
Okay. How about you, Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Miller, and I'm the site coordinator at Wachusett Mountain in central Massachusetts. This is my second year doing it, and I've only been hawk watching since 2019. Already I'm the site coordinator, but ends up being recording secretary and chief cheerleader at this point. But I've been having a great time, and we had a very good season this year, so I'm anxious to hear about how the rest of you done.
Oh, that's great. You really jumped right in. That's awesome. Okay, how about you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve Walter, and I'm off on an island somewhere. that's Long Island. So it's a little different, little cut off from a lot of the hawks, but we got some stuff here. I do a spring watch, which I call Alley Creek. It's kind of on the north shore of Queens. And the great thing about it is it's about 5 minutes from my house. So always, best thing about hawk watching is when you can do it without hitting traffic. And it's actually, and that's the reason why you didn't see me at the last NEHW conference, Paul, because the peak of my season is late March, early April, and it's basically ospreys, turkey vultures, and bald eagles, of all things. That's kind of a weird combination. Might be the only watch in North America where the three most numerous species are those three. And another interesting thing that's happening here is when I started this watch like 5 years ago, I had never seen a black vulture on Long Island. Now I'm trying to figure out how to tell apart the migrants from the residents. You can believe it. And they might actually even be nesting here. My fall watch is Fort Tilden at the western end of Long Island on the South Shore. That's a watch I did back in the 90s, and I've tried to revive it. And that's why you don't see me at Lighthouse Point, Paul. So just bring things. By the way, I did get myself over to Quaker Ridge on the day they had 15,000. I managed to get someone to cover that day. But for the most part, both my watches only happen if I'm there. So, and to bring this full circle, by the way, the counter this year at Quaker Ridge was Harry Wales, who I think you know, Paul.
Yeah.
He did, Plum Beach. So that was kind of interesting, comparing notes.
Okay, thanks,
He
Steve.
saw record numbers this year.
Of what?
Broadwings.
Oh, yeah, it was a great year.
Oh, Quaker, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you, Phil?
All right. I'm Phil Brown, Julie's other half. I am the coordinator of the Pac-Man-Adnock Raptor Observatory in Peterborough, New Hampshire, just upridge from Eric. So hello, Eric, downridge. And we also have another member of our Hawkwatch represented besides Julie and myself. So I'll let Mark introduce himself next or later. So I have the opportunity sometimes to go with Julie on these Raptor road trips. And in addition to being an avid hawk watcher my entire adult life and a little bit when I was a teen, I've gotten to travel to quite a few hawk watches with Julie and our kids in the past few years and get to see how they work and compare a little bit to our site. So we've definitely learned a lot of things and seen a lot of the similarities and also some of the differences. One big difference I think that is going to show tonight is that we have a paid staff counter where it seems like probably a lot of your sites are volunteer run sites. So that might be a pretty major difference, but I think we still have some of the same challenges. So I'm curious to see how some of those challenges play out and if anybody has any creative ideas and solutions.
Okay,
Froze.
thanks. Yeah, his internet might be a little patchy too. He's across town at his office. Candace, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Candace Hess, and I work at the Putney Mountain Hawkwatch in southern Vermont. I'm one of the four official counters there. We have roughly 15 people who work all through the fall season. So we do have solid coverage, and every year is different.
Okay, thanks, Candace. And Mark, you're up.
Well, hello to those friends I met before, usually at Hawk Watches. I seem to have been to Eagle Valley, Wisconsin before Julie was hired there as her first counting job. And the same man that hired her took me on my first, technically Eagle Watch.
We're losing you, Mark. Could you talk closer to your microphone? You still there?
Leaning pretty close to the machine.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay. So I think before Julie got her first Hawk Watch job, I was at a place called Eagle Valley, Wisconsin. I think the man that hired Julie to count was the man that introduced me to the Christmas bird count. We counted 52 bald eagles along the.
Yeah, you faded out again, Mark. I'm not sure what's going on with your audio.
Let me try to turn things up.
Yeah, we might have to move on, unfortunately.
Go ahead, move on. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mark's one of our volunteer counters at HMANA as well. And Craig, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Craig Jackson. I've been hawk watching on Pinnacle Rock, which is a hill outside Boston, and is really a coastal site, even though it's not on the coast. Most of our birds are sharpshins, Cooper's hawks, and osprey. But this year we had a very unusual year with 3 times as many broadwings coming through. And they were using powered flight, basically going against the northwest wind as opposed to soaring. So we were getting very good looks of them. But we also set a new record for the site, beating our old record by 50 birds. But I'm sort of curious about the lateness of the migration and if other people are seeing that, because in mid-October, I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're not going to have anything because we were getting almost no sharpshins at the beginning of October, which is basically our usual time. And then they started hitting in late October. So I'm curious what's happening with migration.
The winds were a problem in October. If you're at a coastal site, I mean, the coast is very dependent on having strong northwest winds, which was almost non-existent during daylight hours in October.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Well, that
weird
certainly could
October.
be part of it. Yeah.
Go, Paul.
I was just going to add to your comment, Steve, that looking at the specific hourly forecasts, you'd be amazed at how frequent the northwest winds are nocturnal, switching to southwest during the day. Yeah.
I absolutely saw that, and I've this time of the year, I've kind of, scaled back on hawk watching, but I'm still trying to do some finch watching and blackbirds. There's a lot of good passerine migration that goes late, and with a few crossbills moving this year, it's some incentive. And just this storm that we're having right now, it's forecast to be west wind tomorrow through 10 a.m. here on Long Island, and the passerine flight dies off at 10 o'clock. So yeah, it's that timing has just been terrible for the diurnal migrants. So what are you gonna do?
All right. Well, Paul, you are next. We have 2 more.
Okay. I'm Paul Roberts. I originally started the Hawk Watch at Wachusett and Plum Island and Mount Watatic, and was actually one of the first people watching regularly on HMANA back in the early 1980s, and first learned about HMANA on Pac-Monadnock from the one guy who was watching there in 1976. So I go back a ways. I'm particularly interested in wind direction and how that influences flights. We look regularly from Wachusett at Putney and Pac, and if you have good birds, we don't expect to see nearly as many, generally because of the winds. And I'm also intrigued by some of the species we don't see that much of, and looking at Todd's fantastic reports from New Brunswick and the reports from Clary Hill from Tom. I'm amazed at the number of red shoulders and red tails and Cooper's hawks reported in the southern part of our region as opposed to the northern part of our region. And I wonder where some of those birds come from.
Mhm.
I would think there's a lot of nesting throughout New England. And they do nest in the southern Hudson Valley. So, it's very likely a lot more birds to draw on in the southern, because they're breeding in the southern part of the region.
Well, even the number of red shoulders at Quaker Ridge this year, I was just like stunned. I'd look at it and they would have over 200 in a day.
Yeah.
It seemed like they really were. I mean, where were those birds in the last 20 years?
Well, yeah, it's actually very interesting. The last time I went to the Northeast Hawkwatch Conference, I gave a talk on that. And, that was a few years already since then. And I think at that point, we were just seeing the tip of the explosion. And as I look at the data, as the years go on, one thing that I find kind of interesting is that they seem to be eruptive. So we're not seeing the same kind of numbers every year.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to be the winds that are, making them disappear in some years. So I think you got a combination of a real population increase and an eruption that happens every few years for who knows what reason. And those years, you're going to see bigger numbers.
One of the things that I'm looking at fairly seriously is in particular red shoulders. And if you look at the breeding atlas for the birds of Maine, most of Maine does not produce red shoulders. You don't have too many up in New Brunswick, Todd.
Very few.
We don't get that many at Wachusett, though we've had better coverage this year than we've had in, I think we've had all-time record coverage in November when you see a lot of shoulders. But I think there's a tendency for shoulders and other birds that are hatched south of most of our sites to disperse north after several months of fledging. And the banding data for red shoulders show a significant number go to the north and east out of Ohio. And that in Connecticut in particular and southern New York, what you may be seeing is a lot of those southern juveniles going back. Because if you look at the difference between Putney and Pac and Wachusett and what they get in southern Connecticut, those birds aren't all growing up in Springfield and Hartford. I think we may have a second wave out of the dispersed birds. But
Well, that's really interesting, Paul. I was looking at some of the numbers from Wagner's Gap in southern Pennsylvania. And so far, there's been 256 red shoulders this year, about half of those in October, half in November. But when you were saying, was it Pam who was saying you had 200 in a day? My jaw about fell off. That's incredible.
when I did the last time I did research on this, I didn't even see anything particularly impressive on the Great Lakes in the spring. So at that point in time, it was really just a southern New England and Hudson Valley phenomenon. Say, Paul, do you see red shoulders at Plum Island in the spring?
No, virtually no numbers.
And the reason
We
I ask,
should introduce Bob here. That's the one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know.
okay, let me
Maybe we
just
could
get this
introduce
point
Bob
in. So
before.
just to
Sure.
finish,
Go ahead,
let me just
Steve.
finish up on this, because when I hawk watched more often at Sandy Hook, New Jersey in the spring, immature red shoulders in particular were quite common there. So, I know you think of red shoulder as an inland bird, but in the spring, juveniles will end up on the coast. So yes, a difference between Plum Island and Sandy Hook is quite stark then.
Okay, maybe we can circle back to red shoulders after a couple questions. Go ahead, Bob, if you want to introduce yourself before we jump into some discussion.
Yeah, I'm Bob Secretary. I'm the coordinator at Plum Island near Newburyport, Massachusetts, and it's a spring site. I've been coordinator there for 3 years now, but I've been a member there for 10 or 12 years. We don't get many red shoulders at all. Well, as a matter of fact, if we see one a year, we're counting ourselves lucky. Most of the birds we get are typical of coastal migration, and it's strongly dependent upon a good westerly component to the wind, northwest, west, southwest when Sharpies are going, and that's about it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. All right. So I did receive questions and discussion topics from a bunch of you. We also distributed a survey this past spring, which many of you probably filled out, that went out to all the site coordinators. And that was kind of an effort to help us better gauge what major challenges are that you're facing, how COVID was affecting your data, if it was at all, what some of your major concerns are. And what we learned from it, I think we heard from about half of site coordinators. We sent it out to 202 different people. We heard from 98. So it really shed some light on, what major challenges were. Clearly the issues vary greatly site to site. Some are paid, some are volunteer. Everybody has kind of a unique situation, but certainly staffing issues was one of the main concerns. Lack of replacement, aging out of hawk watchers, changing weather patterns. Those were some of the major concerns. So jumping in, we can maybe start with one of those the big questions, probably the number one thing I hear about. I just wanted to mention that we can use the chat as well as chiming in. So feel free to, if someone's talking, to, add your comments to the chat. But aging out, attrition, recruitment of counters was a concern. Addressing hawk watching after the passing of a hawk watcher at a minor hawk watch site. So really a lot of concern around just what is next and how to sustain counts. That's the big one. It's the number one question I hear from sites, especially volunteer ones, and often it's the one person that's keeping a site afloat. often or sometimes the founder, and that person can no longer coordinate or count, or, you know, has to move on for whatever reason, health issues. You know, there's about 185 or 90 active spring and fall watch sites and that are entering data currently. And we are losing a few every year for sure. And so in the survey this past spring, we asked sites about like the future of hawk watching at their sites, and 88% said they were very confident they would be counting this year, 2022. 50% said that they were very confident that they would be counting in 3 years. 27 said that they were very confident they would be counting in 5 years. And then only 14% said they were confident they'd be counting in 10. So, you know, obviously lots of variables to consider. But it's certainly clear that there's a lot of sites that, you know, may not have a long-term plan. And a lot of our hawk watchers, you know, are doing this in retirement. So it's a major concern. So I have a few ideas and things regarding this topic, but I'm happy to open it up to you guys and get the discussion going first. If you have any thoughts on how we address the aging out of hawk watchers and recruiting new ones, whether they be young people, middle-aged people, retirement age. Any thoughts to add, anyone?
I'm curious if the people, the sites that have paid counters, was that a solution to lack of volunteers, or why do they have paid counters versus volunteers?
Well, I think
It certainly is.
Yeah, I'll go. I think there tends to be an organization behind the watchers that have paid counters, like, you know, the Greenwich Audubon Society, Bedford Audubon Society, you know, Cape May Bird Observatory, and on and on. So there is a place for the money to come from. You know, a lot of watches are started by one person, you know, doing it as a passion, but there's no money there. So I think that's the key for why some watches can have paid counters.
One thing I just wanted to add was, go ahead.
I was going to say at Greenlaw Mountain, we really have no option other than a paid counter. I founded the site back in 2009, and hawk watching was brand new up here. I was new to the region from New Jersey, having lived there for many years and hawk watched at many sites, just for a casual thing. You know, it wasn't paid, wasn't one of the regular qualified observers. Anyway, up here, there really is nobody to take my place, unfortunately. I don't even have qualified observers. I'm lucky enough to have volunteers on occasion, but that's about it. So it's really a paid observer, or perhaps somebody that's retired and can afford to spend 300 hours or whatever on top of a mountain every year.
Just from my site at Wagner's Gap, we watch on land owned by Audubon of Pennsylvania. And after being a strictly volunteer site for something like 30 or 40 years, the regular volunteer is now, I think he's 76. And 2 years ago, Audubon hired a young person as a paid counter, which really just spelled the group of regular volunteers. Our paid counter is September 1 to December 1, but Wagner's counts from August 1 to December 30th. So, and Brandon only counts during the week. He's a 5-day, you know, a week position, and then volunteers cover the rest of it. He doesn't make much money. You know, he's basically an intern payment.
Yeah, that speaks to one of the concerns. You know, I I made a living going from Hawkwatch to Hawkwatch in my 20s and part of my 30s, when I actually could, I didn't get paid a lot, but I made it work. And I think it's harder. It's getting harder and harder for young people to do that. It's barely enough money to live on in some cases. And it seems from talking to a lot of hawk watchers and organizations, it's hard to interest young people in hawk watching as much as years ago.
I agree. And speaking, yeah, I'll just speak to the history of HMANA a little bit, which started by Ian McLeod, who was a former HMANA board member and avid hawk watcher. It was known that this location was a great hawk watching spot, and volunteers had put in some time and submitted data to HMANA back in the 70s and 80s. But with organizational backing from New Hampshire Audubon, Ian started the site, and Julie was the second paid counter, I believe, in 2006. So currently, yeah, and I think a lot of it started with Julie and really forming a community of people based on observers from the area. The organizational backing was helpful, but a lot of people emerged and found that this was something they could enjoy doing. It helps to have a site that's so visible and have 5,000 or 6,000 visitors every fall. So, I think a lot of it was built from the ground up, and now it's just a matter of trying to maintain that enthusiasm and work with the turnover that happens with aging out, recruiting new people, keeping up with finding a way to pay for a seasonal counter, which is now we pay them twice as much as Julie made back in that day. So it's still barely squeaking by if you
especially
ask
with inflation.
Yeah. Yep.
You pay them by the bird?
By the bird. We've talked about that. Yeah. By the Broadway. Yeah.
I think the Chestnut Hill Hawk Watch has been strictly voluntary. It started as a weekend site for broadwings, and now it's still just basic for broadwings for about 2.5 weeks in September. So we're loosely associated with Litchfield Hills Audubon, though they don't seem to be that interested in, they actually wanted to do a field trip to the site one time, and I wasn't totally discouraging, but I said, you might come up here and there may not be any migrating hawks. So that sort of discouraged the trip organizer. So it's strictly a voluntary site. The big problem I see, at least in this part of Connecticut, there were lots of small sites all over the place that were, really for the broadwing hawk migration, and those sites no longer exist. There's one not too far from us in Torrington, the middle school, and I don't know if Ray Belding did anything there this past autumn. There's one to our southwest in Bridgewater, and I always like to look at numbers there and look at the numbers from Massachusetts and New Hampshire to see what we might be getting, and invariably we don't get the numbers, large numbers of broadwings. I know that over the years the weather is a big factor. I mean, sitting at the Hawk Watch in the late 1990s, 2000, freezing our butts off after a nice cold northwest wind with a cold front, and seeing lots of broadwing hawks, and we don't have that anymore.
We don't have cold in September.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
I'd rather be cold than counting lots of broadwings myself.
This is one thing that Lori Goodrich has seen in all her years at Hawk Mountain, is that she says in September there's fewer cold fronts, and the cold fronts that come through are weaker. It used to be you'd have maybe 2 days after a good cold front, the first day being the best and the second day not too bad. And now, an alleged cold front comes through and you're lucky to get an afternoon.
Yeah, this year, September was good. And obviously the numbers are there to support it. But, we went through about a 5-year period where September was full of southerly winds at
Mhm.
the critical time, west winds, light winds. And, the broad winds were still there. I mean, the inland sites were like Mount Peter, we're getting them, the Kittatinny Ridge, the birds were showing up there. They were just, for Connecticut, we need the northwest winds and at a good clip. And it's not just one day. It kind of builds on itself. You get one good front. And when I was first started doing hawk watching in the late 80s into the 90s, it seemed like every year we'd get a good front on the 10th, the 11th of September. So that would help push some birds down towards the coast. And you'd get another front around the 14th and the 15th. And there was a big pool of birds, waiting right there in the wings to come through. And more recently, we've been seeing a lot of the opposite, where, we could see the numbers, Pac-Monadnock got a bunch of birds and Putney Mountain got birds. But then, the winds behind it were westerly or southerly, and you'd see the birds would end up on the Kittatinny Ridge and just wouldn't make it down to the southern part of New England.
Yeah, I think a lot of the birds that, they're seeing in New Hampshire and Massachusetts are going west and if they're going through Connecticut, they're going further, they're going northwest. And so I just don't think we're getting, and I think that to me, if there were a lot more watches in Connecticut, I think, especially closer towards the Massachusetts and New York line, northwestern Connecticut, I bet there'd be a lot more broad counted there. But I'm always amazed at the numbers of Greenwich. I'm thinking, where would these birds come from? Why?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things at play. So the next question I want to ask you is, do you do your watch alone?
No, I have two other people who regularly help me do the watch. Sometimes I'm not there, sometimes I'm there. So there are three of us that are fairly regular.
But what about simultaneously? Are the three of you there?
Oh yeah, a lot of the times we're there at the same time.
Okay, now do your birds pass overhead or is it a wide sky for them?
It's a wide, it's spread out. It's spread
So
out.
the thing you need to know about Quaker Ridge is a lot of people go there and they got some really sharp people and they're picking out big kettles way out to the north, to the south of the watch. So yeah, there's a lot of birds there, but the quality of the coverage there is pretty amazing. And I don't know if any other broadwing watch has that kind of coverage to match. I'm sure there are others.
What site, Steve?
Quaker Ridge, Greenwich, Connecticut.
But Quaker Ridge has had terrible years.
Well, that's because of the weather pattern of the last few years, as I explained.
Well, Wagner's did not have a great broadwing year this year. And we've got really outstanding people on that site, people with big scopes looking all over the place. But still, there were birds going to the south that, you'd pick up some of them. You could tell they were fallout from a big kettle, but we didn't see the big kettle. So they were going, I would say southeast of us was the prime direction where we were losing them.
So if you're getting huge numbers going through southern Connecticut and southern New York, a lot of those birds are going to end up going through like Montclair and down through the Philadelphia area. And I don't know.
But they haven't been going through Montclair lately either. They were in the past, but not lately.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I didn't look at the numbers this year. I tend to look more at the numbers north of me to see what's coming rather than behind me. But yeah, they went through that same stretch that everybody in the southern part of New England and the Hudson Valley went through for about 5 years where, we just weren't getting big numbers.
And one of the reasons that we believe at Wagner's is that here again, that cold front is dying out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that by the time they get as far south as where we are, there it's really died, and the birds have spread out and kind of gone more to the southeast. They did not go through Montclair. Hawk Mountain had a better broadwing year than we did at Wagner's this year, but we've done pretty well with bald eagles considering that we're up to 795 so far.
Well, I was amazed at the banding project that they did at Hawk Mountain. Larry Fisher was involved with, and it was just amazing. There was one bird here in this part of Connecticut that was banded that went due west and was in the middle of New York State before it ever went south. And I think that particular bird did go over Hawk Mountain.
Was that a young bird, David? Was that
Yeah.
a young bird? So he was probably dispersing as much as anything.
Yeah.
Well, that raises, a big question as whether patterns are clearly changing. A lot of these sites are getting hit harder than some of us, and just seeing nothing year after year after year. And I'm hearing from many sites saying, look, we're not seeing anything anymore. Should we even keep counting? It's important data to collect, but you want to be able to engage people and excite people with birds at your site. And if you're not seeing anything, you want people to.
We excite people when bald eagles go by.
Yes,
Bald eagles we've
sure.
seen. It's just amazing compared to in the past, and it's so nice to see good news about recovery of particular species of bird. When somebody pulls up and wants to see a bird, hopefully they have binoculars and, oh, there's a bald eagle coming over right now, so they get all excited about that. And I had a guy who does a nature column for the Danbury, Connecticut newspaper, and he came up to our hawk watch, and I talked to him about, sometimes we see lots of broad-winged hawks. Of course, it was a nice, warm, sunny day, and the winds from the southwest, and we didn't see too much that day, so he didn't stay too long.
Julie, are those sites that you're losing, are they in any particular part of the country?
I would say here and there, New Jersey, Connecticut, even a few in the Great Lakes, New York. So yeah, it's kind of spread out, just
Okay.
definitely a change in wind patterns around the Great Lakes that I'm hearing about, in the Northeast, probably those two regions the most, but
At our site, we seem to be a slave to short-term weather, so that if there's a storm that comes up the coast, the first winds that we see are going from east to west.
okay.
And the past couple of years, we've had a couple of those come along and really ruin our broadwing season. This year, we got lucky because there was just this kind of funk over us in the middle of September. I don't know if you remember, there was a couple of days when there was just fog and rain and things like that. But the lucky thing for us was that it extended all the way up into northern Vermont. And it seemed to hold the birds in place in Maine. And even, I think to your detriment, they came down to southern Maine. And when that released around the 19th or so, we just got a blast of birds coming through. We had 8,000 birds in a day, almost 8,000, which was just
Wow.
stunning for us.
Mhm.
And if I remember right, you guys didn't see a whole lot of that, nor did Putney. And last year,
Nope.
we had that same kind of thing, but it only went up maybe a little past you. And so the birds came down, I think, from the north, saw that, just that murk there, and went west and came down through Putney. And Putney had a great year last year. So for us, it's just, a lot of short-term things. The
Yeah,
one
there
thing
was
I
a
saw
line-
this year is maybe a climate change type thing. It was just that it was warmer this year and it seemed to throw things back about a week or so.
Well, I mean, 2 years ago, when our numbers were, just sort of average, right after we stopped at Lighthouse Point in New Haven, they had this phenomenal, for them, a coastal site had a phenomenal number of Broadwing.
Yeah. We saw
It's actually not a
500 of
new
those,
thing.
about 500 of those. And then
Yeah.
Paul went down to Lighthouse Point the next day and told us about seeing 5,000 come through, which
It's
is
actually a long history of late September, maybe early October Broadwing flights at Lighthouse Point, but maybe topping out around 1,000 or so. But yeah, that is one of the weird things that large numbers of predominantly, third week of September migrant, large numbers somehow seem to get lost and don't find their way out until late September.
Yeah.
By the way,
Yeah,
when I
can
talked
explain
about
that.
the early patterns, patterns that set up great Broadwing years. I mentioned cold fronts on the 10th or 11th of September as starting things off. I find that nowadays there's almost no Broadwings at that point in southern New England, and I don't even bother trying anymore. I think I could actually do better with ospreys on September 10th, at my spot than going to an inland site for Broadwings, which is kind of an interesting thing that Broadwings do seem to be trending slightly later in the season, but that late September thing is been around for quite a while.
Did
I have
Phil
a-
lose
I would
power?
suggest
Interesting.
I would suggest that your late September birds are coming out of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has a sizable population of Broadwings, and they get trapped there because Nova Scotia is essentially an island. I've seen videos of Broadwings, 100 Broadwings, kettles of 100 Broadwings in mid-October coming out of
Wow.
Nova Scotia.
Wow.
Mhm.
Are
Yeah.
those juveniles or adults? Are they able to age them at all?
The majority of the late birds there seem to be juveniles. They get quite a few that hang out in the winter, and they're almost always first-year birds.
In the winter.
I have a question for
Yes.
Pam. Pam, when I'm on Wagner's Gap, we always say, look to what Franklin Mountain had the day before, because that's about what we're going to get, a day later. So
Yeah,
where
a
do
few
you look?
days maybe.
Yeah, a few, but still, you're the hawk watch that is most likely to be similar to what we eventually
Right.
get at Wagner's. So who do you look for north of you? There's nothing, is there?
Greenlaw, way up in New Brunswick. No, there really is no gauge. I mean, I look at Ontario just to see what's moving. It's not going to come
Yeah.
our way. And
Right.
there's nothing in the Adirondacks. So
No, there isn't.
Putney, Greenlaw, just, like Clary Hill's too far east. So I just look at the northern sites to see what's moving, but it's really just based on history. What the weather looks good, so this is what we're going to expect to see. But
And
this
it's a shame there aren't any sites in the Adirondacks. I
Right.
would go up about the weekend after Labor Day and be up on a mountain someplace, and you could see small kettles just rising up out. It's like there's
Right.
got to be great spots there for a hawk site.
Yeah, somewhere
Any of
between
you,
like the New York Vermont border, I feel like more, east, more west of Putney would be a good spot somewhere up there. But this year we've had just like south winds, bad visibility, like our golden eagle numbers are way down. But by the time they get to Pennsylvania, there's this funneling effect. So they're still getting to the sites down in Pennsylvania, but our numbers are just way down.
Most of the golden eagle migration is to the west. So, even Raccoon Ridge, which is on the Kittatinny Ridge, which is in New Jersey, doesn't get nearly as many as Hawk Mountain and Bake Oven Knob, etc.
Right.
So I think a lot of the Goldens are just west of us, probably flying straight south or southwest.
That's
So,
interesting. I've seen some research about the golden eagle flight. The young birds are the ones we usually get at Wagner's. They fly the eastern side of the ridges. Nick Bolgiano has done some research that shows the adult birds fly on the west side of the ridges. Wagner or Allegheny Ridge, Allegheny Front usually gets them. And Nick seems to think it's because the adult birds know what they're doing and how to get there, and the young birds are still just floating around trying to figure out what to do. So, you know,
we had one golden eagle in mid-September at Chestnut Hill, and we were just flabbergasted and totally surprised.
I've had them as early as 1 or 2 birds in August even, but that's really uncommon. It's usually, you know, Hawk Mountain will see one and call us, and then we look out for it, and then eventually we'll see it too. So far, our golden eagles we're at 198, so it's not an outstanding year. It's not a bad year. It's, you know, we'll probably get a good many more in the next week or 10 days.
Right,
think
we've
a lot
only
of
had
them,
110, so we're down up in Franklin.
well, a lot of the
I might-
Goldens winter in the Appalachians. Not sure where they breed, but I think it's probably a function of where they're coming from and where they're going to that puts a lot of the migration west of the Delaware River. So Franklin Mountain's in a good spot, and the Kittitinnies on the Pennsylvania side are in a good spot. But you know, anywhere, you know, from the Hudson River and east, you know, it's a big deal when you get a golden. Not necessarily a rarity at every spot, but it's always special. You know, they're not like bald eagles, which are, you know, nothing anymore.
Starting to be a dime a dozen almost. With
you
the
look at
balls.
I might jump in, guys, and kind of
Oh.
steer us back. Just, I know my lights are flickering, and I think Phil lost power there for a few minutes, so I want to try and stay on schedule a bit. Well, it's just about 7. And we have until 8 if we want to keep going, but I wanted to steer it back to kind of recruitment of counters. If anybody has any more thoughts on that. I know usually when sites come to me with those concerns saying we're running out, we don't have enough volunteers to keep things going, I usually direct them to like local universities and colleges. I know that works for many people, not so much others who maybe don't have a big pool of schools nearby to go to. You know, sometimes you can even go to high schools. A couple sites I know I've had great luck reaching out to high schools or making some kind of arrangement for community service. It's you know, hit or miss. You may not get somebody to stick with your count for years and years if you're taking on high school or college kids. But I'm interested if anybody's had luck with that, or reaching out to bird clubs or Audubon chapters. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
When I was the Plum Island coordinator about 20 years ago, I restarted the watch, and well, people go through Plum Island, so if they see that I'm getting a lot of birds, you know, they stop. But what I did was I started an email list of anybody who was interested in finding out what we were getting, and would send that out, and often look at the weather beforehand and suggest when the winds were going to be strong, and people, because you don't want people coming on a day when the winds aren't good, because then they'll get discouraged. Like at Pinnacle Rock, the same thing. I have an email list that I say to people who are interested, well, only come if it's a really good day, and I'll tell you when it's going to be a good northwest wind, because if they go there and there's nothing, they'll never come back. But when they see the birds coming right in front of you at Pinnacle Rock, which they do because they're avoiding Boston, then you know, they'll come back. And so I picked up a few hawk watchers that way. The problem with recruiting younger people is then you go to weekend only. So I'm now retired, so I can be there much more often, but so it's a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, whether you have the good eyes on the weekends or you have the older eyes, throughout the week. And so what I try and do is encourage them to come when there's a good wind. And I noticed that Eric did the same thing at Wachusett now. He started a newsletter where he's recruiting people, keeping people informed of what's going on. And, that's really the way to get people involved, I think.
Yeah, I've been
if
trying
they
to
come on a good day, then they'll come back. But if they just come on a bad day, you're not going to get them again.
I've been trying to do a retention thing with the group that we have already by putting out an email and basically cheerleading the thing. Luckily, we've got at Wachusett Mountain, we're a Monadnock formation, and a state reservation, so that a lot of people hike it all the time. So we're passing out literature and things like that, just trying to get people enthusiastic about it, and always shout out and let people know when there's a bald eagle around. So
it sounds like you're targeting people that are not birders and trying to turn them into hawk watchers. So what I find particularly annoying here in the New York area, there are really a lot of birders, probably more than ever. And they just want to find rarities and run up their year lists and fill out their eBird checklists. And, it's just a different way of approaching birds. It just isn't that culture of watching migration for the most part. So.
Well,
I wonder. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I list at our CT Birds. I tell people when the hawk watch is starting. I make reference to HawkCount information. And if we have a good flight a particular day for us, I will put a report in on the CT Birds list. My local Western Connecticut Bird Club does some publicity in their email newsletter. And there is some mention in the Litchfield Hills Audubon newsletter about hawk watches, but it's gotten, and I agree. I think the problem is most people who are interested in birds are not really interested in spending a long period of time just looking for a particular species of birds. They're more interested in working on their list, whatever the latest list is that they're working on. And I have no problems with that, but it would be helpful if they'd be willing to spend a little more time at a hawk watch. And I've had people come in response to stuff I put at CT Birds. And we had a few days where we had, like 7 or 8 people at the hawk watch, which is for us is good. And the people were competent. They knew what to look for, and it was great to have all those eyes in the sky looking for those broadwings, which are become fewer at Chestnut Hill. But I think the problem is for younger generation or even people that are interested in birds to get them, to take time to, just be at one location for a period of time looking for, specific, migrating hawks.
Right.
Yeah, there is
exactly. Oh, sorry, Carolyn. I was just going to add that.
Julie.
I was just going to say, I think that's exactly part of the problem, and that a lot of people convincing somebody to stand in one position all day when they could be out birding, exploring, and growing their list. That's a challenge, and especially with young people, right, who just want to be, active and moving around. So I get that. I was wondering if, in addition to like e-newsletters and posting on listservs, if like a note out at like creating a flyer for like a CBC gathering, that's another place to get the word out to birders. I realize, but like Steve said, birders can sometimes not be interested at all in hawk watching. But but I wonder if there was more of a willingness for some training too, like a training. I think hawk watching to some birders can be a little intimidating or daunting. So I don't know, it might be something to think about to offer a day during peak broadwing season for people to come out and try it out and get some training. I don't know. I would love to help with that. If we could ever get a group together of some interested beginners, I would love to help with some training.
I remember when I lived in New Jersey, Pete Dunn and some other people put together a hawk watch guide for high school kids. And they actually did encourage kids to go out, on the bleachers of their football, stadium area and watch for migrating hawks. And that, of course, that's a long time ago now, but I thought that was a great idea, somehow incorporate this into some program at a high school or even at a college with a possible, field trip to a hawk watch site to, see what that's all about.
Right, exactly.
If any of your states have a young birders club, that could be another option of reaching out to the club and offering field trips with hawkwatch experts. It's always hard to pick those days though. So, you never know when the birds are going to be flying. And like a few of you have mentioned, if they're not up there, it's not going to be a great experience necessarily. That said, we've had some luck just recruiting, just like the ways you're all talking about, communicating out to the public and being present in the community and just being a friendly face. I think the friendliness that a lot of people say they get when they come up to PAC is the reason they keep coming back. And we have had luck recruiting a lot of our regulars from people who just have wandered up the mountain once or twice and had a good experience and just started coming back. And eventually, a lot of these folks have turned into really capable observers too. So we've been lucky in that way, and probably getting more of those type of people than recruiting birders from the surrounding area to come and help on a regular basis. So I'd love to figure out a way to reach the birding community at large a little more successfully and pull them in.
I think it helps if you have a site where you do get some birds other than raptors. At Wagner's, we get good warblers usually. And, other interesting birds, you get the crossbills occasionally, you get the ravens are all over the place. And that helps. I also think it helps that we're along a trail, Tuscarora Trail and Darlington Trail. So we get outdoor people wandering by. And if they wander by at the same time there's an eagle in the sky, that's always a good thing. And a lot of them do come back. I don't know that they turned into great hawk watchers, but they have come back and enjoyed it. So, that's a start.
Yeah. Well, I have a few people that, come out on a regular basis and they enjoy it. And as long as I'm there finding birds for them, but I can't really leave them alone. I can't have them do a full day on their own, or if I leave and, my fall watch, my biggest issue is traffic I have to deal with going home. So if that watch goes away, that's the reason, because I just get tired of that trip unless I can find more people. But so, I got one person, he comes all the time, but if I leave because I want to beat the traffic, he'll stay a while longer, but he's got to do it while he's walking around. So, you probably miss a few birds when you're walking around. And so my watch, I mentioned before, finch flights, blackbirds, and really, all kinds of diurnal migrants. And got a couple of really competent people that'll come out for that morning flight. But as I said, the passerines are pretty much done by 10 o'clock on most days, and they're out of there. They don't stay for the hawks, and which is a shame because these are competent people. a lot of stuff. I'm just trying to figure out how to do it. The other day I counted 662 Bonaparte skulls. I got an ocean next to me. So we see royal terns and Forster's terns and bottlenose dolphins and humpback whales. So it's actually
Sounds
a lot
great.
to see. So, I mean, if I could figure out the magic formula to get people to, okay, so if you're not seeing hawks, look at all this other stuff going on.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, we
we have-
usually have a resident copperhead that people enjoy
Oh.
looking at because he
Ooh.
sleeps underneath a rock all day long, and you can go and look at him. So that
Wow.
people enjoy that.
I'm gonna remember
Well-
that, Carolyn, because snakes are always top on my list, even
Oh.
more than the raptors for my two kids. So we're gonna remember that.
And the
Um,
other
I
thing we
think-
have is fence lizards and the blue-tailed skinks. Those are always a
Oh,
big
yeah.
hit too. Yeah.
Oh, great.
they're
And don't
actually
forget,
called-
don't forget the monarchs.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think they're
yes.
actually called five-line skink.
Oh, you're right. 5-lined. The ones.
So unless anyone has any other comments, we should probably move on a little bit. And actually, the next question, it's kind of a nice segue. Pam was wondering, similar to this last question, but when her site is busy and there's only one counter, what do you do? It's hard to interact with visitors. And I know this is a tough one because we want to be, welcoming and friendly and engaged with people. But I'm sure all of you can relate, like I can, to, just trying to count your hardest when somebody is asking you a million questions. So that if people have thoughts on that, feel free to chime in. I know we've had a lot of luck partnering with local schools to have internships and interpretive naturalists at our site at HMANA. That's been great. I know that's not going to be a perfect fit for all sites, but we always try to have interpretive naturalists and volunteers on site to assist the counters. I think interpretive signs can really help too. If you just have, some material about the migration there, some brochures and some handouts, that can certainly help. But feel free to chime in if anybody has thoughts. And welcome, Seth. I see that you're joining us. Glad you could make it.
Yes, it's quite windy here in Maine, and it's so connection is a little weird today.
Yep, here in New Hampshire too. We're having a crazy windstorm right now.
And here in Pennsylvania too. Yeah, it's about
In
45
upstate New
mile an
York.
hour. Yeah.
Lost power once, but we have a generator. We're good.
Oh, good.
At a Mass Audubon workshop that I went to on reaching out to people, I talked about this by Hawkwatch because hikers are always going by, and sometimes, like I'll be on a bird and they're walking by me and I wouldn't even know they're there. But at other times, when I'm not doing something, but they suggested having a laminated sheets with the numbers that we get, things like that I could just hand to them, and then they could ask questions and stuff like that. Plus the laminated sheets of the identifying the hawks is basically where you start, showing them, well, these are the 3 different types of hawks, and then they can look at it and ask questions while you're still looking and stuff like that. So really having good visuals that are handy to give to people. And what I started to do was make a visual of showing the difference between my September, October, and November counts of the main birds that I get, which is about 6 different species. That would be, and then on the back, having what HawkCount gives you, which is the fall totals, so that they can really see over the years what you get.
Yeah.
That sort of thing is really helpful for getting people involved or even interested. And as I said, anybody who shows interest, I take their name and email and send them out my report and, basically forward what HawkCount sent back to me. But the other thing is have an extra pair of binoculars in your pack. Because I had one kid come up and, at the time I didn't have a pair of binoculars, but he stayed with us for 5 hours, sighting birds with his naked eye that we weren't even seeing. And so I said, well, you come give me a call the night before and I'll pack binoculars for you. And so he came another day and stayed another 3 hours. To have a pair of binoculars makes all the difference in the world if you're on a HawkWatch site. So.
Yeah. Oh, and that's great. You're getting their names too, Craig. That's a great idea. Yeah, we always have binoculars handy at PAC. Absolutely.
Visitor.
Mhm.
Think
Yeah,
the-
well, Paul and I, and others on the HMANA board, we put together site flyers. We haven't done them the last couple of years, but we'd love to bring them back again. And some of you I know do already have site flyers at your site, but basically we've been helping sites to produce these two-sided color flyers that have lots of pretty hawk pictures and just information about your site, and maybe some statistics, some season totals, what people can expect when they come. And then the back side of the sheet is all information about HMANA. And we produce these for sites for free, and sites are just responsible for paying for the printing. And they've been a great success. So if anybody's interested in those, it'd be a great way to just get some information out to your local community and get people familiar with HMANA too.
And what's the printing cost again, Julie? How
Oh,
much
gosh,
is the printing cost?
Do you remember, Paul? I guess it's the mailing costs, right? That the sites cover, and HMANA was covering the
That's
the
what
printing?
I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought, that we covered the printing, but not the mailing cost. So
Yeah.
it wasn't very much to individual sites.
We cover the upfront art costs. So the design and layout, etc. And then they select how many they want. And the normal increments are 100, 250, or 500. And it's extremely reasonably priced for a quality full color product. But the best bet is to buy the larger quantity and wrap fish and chips or ham sandwiches in them, whatever you need to do. The problem is sites keep them because they look expensive and important, and they give them out sparingly, whereas you should give them out to everybody, because they tend to take them. They're too pretty to throw away, that sort of thing.
I hear that too. At Wagner's, I keep harping on them, hand them out, but you'd think they were made of gold,
Yeah.
We also have a lot of HMANA brochures here. So if any sites are interested in getting a stack of these to put under a rock, or put in a little, clear envelope, make them available to visitors. I can send them some of those to you guys for free. So just let me know.
I think my problem with my HawkWatch is that people will come and stop, and I'll actually give them a lot of information. And my two colleagues are annoyed because there's usually a good flight going by when you're telling me your eyes should be in the skies looking for the hawks, but people are stopping and asking questions, and so you want to give them some answers.
Yeah.
Where our site is at a T intersection, and it's a shortcut for people to cut around downtown Litchfield, Connecticut, to go to other places in Northwest Connecticut. So they'll get to the stop sign, they'll see people looking up in the air, and what are you looking at? And then I do my spiel, and if there's anybody behind, and hopefully no one is pulled up behind them wanting to make that turn at that stop sign. At the same time, I want to give them my little spiel. But I think as a result of that, the major, more recent hawk watcher who's very good, she brought her son there. She was homeschooling him, and he turned out not to be much interested in watching hawks, but she did, and she kept it, and she's come back every year, for
That's great.
15 years.
Well, that's a good point, David. We get a lot of homeschoolers up on the mountain too, and they'll often stay, 4, 5, 6 hours. So maybe somehow reaching out to, I don't know, a homeschooling network, if there is such a thing, and, letting them know that homeschoolers are welcome at a hawk watch.
It's a great idea. Yeah, we've had great luck with retaining homeschoolers. They seem to have a very good attention span, good skills at engaging with adults, I've noticed, but also just coming back time after time. One of our counters who's Katrina Fenton, who's counted many years for us at PAC, started out as a homeschooler. So that's a good idea, Carolyn.
David, I spent some time in Litchfield over the years. Has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, but I'm not sure. I know that
I actually live in Washington, Connecticut, where the late Mike Harwood lived. And I never met Mike Harwood. He passed the year before I came up to live in Washington, Connecticut, and come to Connecticut. But I have an autographed copy of his and his wife's copy of Travels with John J. Audubon, which is a great
park
book.
in Washington. It's known for West Virginia whites. Steeple Rock Park, is that the
Steep Rock? Yeah, Steep Rock.
Rock.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been there a couple of times, but there's actually a place up in Litchfield that I used to stay, do a lot of moth blacklighting out in the woods. Great area up there.
I was thinking of Mike Harwood did a spring count at this place called the Pinnacle overlooking Lake Warmont. And that area is now the Steep Rock Preserves area. Maybe I should talk to them about maybe starting up a spring watch there in that area.
Or do it yourself. What are you busy with?
Or hike up that long, steep hill to get to that site.
Yeah. That's,
All right, so I'm going to jump ahead to a next question. Everybody's okay with that? Another question that a couple people had was pertaining to visibility issues at their site and tree growth. So that's definitely an issue. I know it has a lot to do with, the ownership of the land, some hawk watches being on private land and some on, inside a state park. So thoughts on that? I know we struggle with this at PAC-Monadnock, being inside a state park and only being able to trim or cut back or cut down a certain number of trees every year. Anybody have anything to share on that topic?
How did you get permission to cut them down?
Every year, it's a bit of a song and dance that we have to do for the park. And every once in a great while, we're successful enough to get the park to take action on their own. We're luckily, even though we don't really have annual tree cutting, which, would arguably be needed in order to maintain what we had. It seems like we're keeping up with it at an okay interval at this point. But I'd say, regardless of public or private ownership, I would imagine.
I think we might have lost you, Phil.
Yeah, I was wondering whether he was just waiting for an answer or he froze.
No, he
It
froze.
was the latter.
He froze up.
Oh,
I know for with HMANA, we do have a HawkWatch fund where sites can apply for funding each year. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're thinking about, building a platform or a tower, certainly one of our grants wouldn't cover the whole construction of that. But if you're thinking about that, something to keep in mind. And we also, HMANA is always happy to offer letters of support. I know we write one annually for Todd up there in Greenlaw, just stressing like the importance of Raptor migration and the importance of the site and the data contribution. So if you find yourself, battling a state agency or, in need of some letter of support for maintaining the view, keeping the view open, just let us know. I do about maybe 5 or 6 letters a year for different HawkWatch sites. So something to keep in mind. If, we don't have a lot of weight, but what little weight we do, we're happy to throw around. All right. Anybody have any other thoughts on visibility issues?
Well, we have a different problem at Wagner's. It's mostly rocks. And so it's pretty open. We've got a couple of trees that we dearly love for shade, and they're in bad shape and we're afraid we're going to lose them. So we'd like to keep our trees at the moment so we can get a little shade from the intensity of the sun beating down on the rocks. But sometimes when it comes to visibility, we have, it seems sometimes like it's hazier. We don't have as many crystal clear days as we used to. So I think that can impact what we count and what we see. Because especially when you get at the margins of what you can see anyway, if you got some haze or, then you're really in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but that sometimes also helps fight the blue sky of death, as sometimes known. Sometimes
I
a
don't
little
like
haze or the
I don't
smoke
like
from
the
a
blue
distant
sky.
fire.
Yeah, I don't
I'd
like
rather-
the blue
I'd rather-
sky either.
I like those angels. I like those angels in the sky that are clouds.
I hate it when broadwing season comes along and it's a perfectly blue sky. It's like, oh my gosh, that's
Yep.
just awful.
Yeah, how many are flying over our heads right now? that
Oh,
we're seeing?
we
Yeah.
talk about that all the time. How many are we missing because they're just not visible?
So we ought to do a survey on the most commonly asked questions at HawkWatch. That might be one, or the most common statement, but I figured number one has to be, how do you know you're not counting the same one twice?
Oh, yeah,
Exactly.
you're right. That's number one.
Number one. Yep, by far. All right, well, it's 7:30, and I will bring up one more question, I think. And I think Phil finally lost his connection, unfortunately. I wanted him to chime in on this because he knows quite a bit about accessibility, but this was a question about developing or improving accessibility at HawkWatch sites. And I have heard about this a lot from many people in the last year. And HMANA just started our IDEA committee, which is Inclusion, Diversity, Equality, and Accessibility Committee. So we're kind of in the process of going through the results from our survey that we initiated earlier this year. And so we are trying to gauge like what's important to sites, what you guys think we should be focusing on Certainly accessibility and improving trails has been coming up quite a bit. And just, yeah, what you feel HMANA should be focused on. So, you know, if people have ideas about that, feel free to share. We've talked about creating a fund at HMANA, like in addition to our HawkWatch fund, specifically for making accessibility improvements to HawkWatch sites. I know that kind of varies greatly in whether that means a whole, you know, whole new trail system or simply just a ramp here and there.
Porta
And this is
potties.
an area we want to include on our website, where we want to create kind of this forum just for Hawkwatchers and site coordinators. So we're working on getting that started, and hopefully we can have an area on that website or web page that includes like some resources for accessibility and things like this.
Good.
Is anybody planning on doing that? I know Pam, you said you are, right, with
Right.
the Delaware.
We're one of those sites where we don't own the land. We lease it from a church, and we tried to buy it from them this year, and they're just not interested in selling it. So we're kind of reluctant to get a $25,000 grant on property we don't own.
Oh,
So
okay, I
we're
see.
we're kind of stuck. But I think what we've done is kind of an interim. We brought in an accessible. It's not as nice as the one at Derby Hill, but it's, you know, you could get in there. A porta potty, which to have on the site. We never had one before. We had an outhouse in the woods, so this is better. And we put in a couple of resting benches that people can, you know, hang out on the way up to the site. So it's not totally accessible, but people really appreciate it. So, you know, little things like that, they don't cost a lot of money.
Right.
I think the
People
big,
could
big,
drive. They could, if they have a good vehicle, they could drive up the hill if they ask permission. So we're trying to let people know, you know, if that's really an issue for them, they could drive up.
yeah, parking is an issue at my location. Because across from the T intersection is a big field. And the owner of that field decided he didn't like people driving out onto that field. So they put these white stones along one side of one of the roads. And then on the other side by this Civil War monument. And then, of course, this past September and October, the town was working on putting in improving sewer connections. So parking was a little dicey, to say the least. We were able to park. Did have a problem with one local person who complained I was parked on his land, and I told him the town of Litchfield owns this section of land that you claim is yours. I said, if you want to have a discussion about this, we can. There was all kinds of noise and construction going on, and he did not pursue it. So he probably did not know that the town does own right of way on either side of a road. And I'm wondering whether the people that put the stones up on the other side of the road knew about that, or whether the town cared about their putting the stones there or not. But parking is a bit of an issue. It's not, you can get there. It's a matter of parking safely. It's not a major road. It's just sort of an annoyance for people, especially if they show up with larger vehicles, which a lot of people, of course, have nowadays.
Julie?
Funny, some of the issues that we have that are very local to us. So my fall hawk watch is in a parking lot in a public park, but most people can't park there. So it's part of the National Park Service, but it's a fisherman's parking lot, and most birders can't park there. Now, I have a permit, you know, as a researcher to do the hawk watch, and I got a limited number from the Park Service to give to other people, but just ridiculous, some of the issues you have to deal with, and mine is as ridiculous as they come. And that's actually could be a problem as far as getting more people to come, because most don't have the permit. But anyway, go on, Paul.
I was going to ask, do we know how many active sites are conducted on private land only through the good graces of the owner.
Hmm.
I'm thinking of Tom McCullough and the precariousness of the Clary Hill Watch, because there's the, as I understand it, the owner who tends to be grumpy and not want to see too many people, and everything is okay, but he's up there in age and his heir apparent is less enthusiastic about this intrusion. And we're looking in Eastern Mass and establishing at least a part-time spring site on private commercial property to do some spring hawk watching in April. And has there been any discussion or thought given to some sort of recognition to sites that are conducted on totally private land? And the Franklin site might this might be apropos for it, to recognize it, to give it increased stature in the eyes of the property owner, and in terms of the community. I'm thinking of what happened with the Salanino bird feeders in Texas, where it was given recognition by the state conservation area and by the ABA, and they put up a sign, recognized by the American Birding Association as an invaluable contribution to whatever in Texas and North America. Can we perhaps look at doing something like that for some of these privately owned sites to enhance their status and the landowner's status locally, and recognize, maybe even, financially?
Yeah. Interesting
Yeah.
idea. I know our St. James Church is happy to have us be there forever, as far as they're concerned. They like us to be there, but they just don't want to let go of the land.
I can understand
But
that.
that's an interesting idea. I mean, even to get a state grant, we would have to say, have an easement that said it will be there, forever. And they don't want to commit to that either. So.
Yeah.
I like that idea, Paul, of creating some kind of official recognition.
Yeah.
We've been toying around with creating signs for Hawkwatch sites. When I'm visiting sites on Raptor road trips, that's the one thing I notice, is that so many volunteer sites don't have any kind of signage. And so we want to come up with a sign. At first we were thinking something like an interpretive sign that we'd get funding for the, grant funding. But vandalism is such an issue at so many sites. It would probably be more like a political sign, that you, like the on the metal frame that you take up with you each day and, pack away in your car. And then include that, the name of the site and that they're a member of the HMANA HawkCount network, something kind of official. But I like your idea, Paul, of something a little more substantial, and having some kind of like certification, or more than just a letter of support to the landowner, is a great idea. To answer your question too, Paul, the survey we sent out earlier this year asked about private versus public land regarding Hawkwatch sites. We only heard from half of site coordinators from the survey, but of those, 30% were on private land and 70% were on public land. So it gives you a little bit of an idea.
Yeah.
Other comments on that topic? Anybody else have any other comments to add? No? Okay. Well, those were the main questions I wanted to cover tonight. Does anybody have any other questions they want to bring up or things to discuss?
I have one in terms of the previous discussion of golden eagles. If you look at the spaghetti maps done on golden eagle migration, you see exactly where they come from, and that's where they go to band them, in Ungava and in northern Labrador primarily. I have a question, if anybody knows the answer. Do they intentionally include juveniles or exclude juveniles? Because juveniles are the least productive investment in terms of radio telemetry. Half of them die off before they can give you a good year's information. So I'm not sure what the percentage of juveniles is, but certainly almost all of the birds that are radio tagged in the two major nesting areas never enter New England airspace. And what it's believed, my understanding is that most of the early birds are juveniles. And as Carolyn was saying, they don't know where they're going and they don't know when they have to be there. And they don't want to listen to any adult telling them.
That's about
So
right.
they wander around. And in the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen more golden eagles reported throughout eastern New England. It used to be if you wanted to see a golden eagle, you go to the Berkshires and you get one of the lost birds Steve was referring to. But the birds go down the Appalachian Ridge and don't come off. So I think those have to be almost entirely adult birds, and they don't do much wandering.
Well,
So-
I can tell you from the birds that we tagged through the, like working with Trish Miller and Todd and those guys,
Yeah.
Whatever bird came to the camera trap, that's the bird we got. It didn't matter if it was adult or juvenile. So any of the birds that we had with telemetry tags, over the years, it was whatever bird came to the bait.
But you're on the main highway, and there aren't.
No, these were camera traps throughout New York State.
Yeah, but I think most of those are on the main highway. I'm not aware of any of them in Massachusetts, and I'm
Yeah, I
sure
don't
there
know.
may be meat piles in Maine, but if you put them where the adults go, you're going to get mainly adults, and I think that's what the data is. That's my best guess.
Mhm.
But I've had in the past several weeks multiple golden eagle reports going across Boston, and they're different individuals, almost all juveniles. And in the past 2 years, we've had juveniles winter in the area, and in some cases associate with bald eagles for roosting, but not for hunting. And so most of these birds are young, and I'm wondering, and maybe Todd has something here. There are small isolated pockets of nesting golden eagles outside of Labrador and Ungava. Is he aware of anything in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or Newfoundland that might be producing more young birds that stay east of the interstate, so to speak? But I think something's going on with young eagles, goldens.
I can
think you
speak
need
to
to
what's
do
going
a-
on. I can
Go
speak to
ahead.
what's going on in Eastern Canada, my limited knowledge of it, and that's the population in the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec is increasing. When we see golden eagles here in New Brunswick, we assume that they're coming from the Gaspé. As far
Okay.
as I know, there aren't any reproducing goldens in New Brunswick yet. I think it's just a matter of time before they come back to the northern portion of the province. But for now, there's none here, and there's none in Nova Scotia.
Okay, that's the closest. The Gaspé is the farthest east. and the smallest of the three areas.
Mhm.
So that was my thought, but I didn't know if there was anything further east or south of that. And
By
I
the
think
way, how many of you are doing winter raptor surveys?
I am.
Good. Need more. How do you like that, Julie? I'm recruiting.
Thank you for that plug, Steve. Yes, we need more winter raptor surveys. Check out our page on the HMANA website if you're interested.
No, I thought of that because the area that I do in southern New York, a little bit of northern New Jersey, seems to have golden eagles in an area that didn't have them before. So
yeah, I
Okay.
think the evidence suggests the eastern population is expanding and the western isn't. And I'm not sure why the eastern is expanding. I've not seen good data on that. I had lunch with Mike and Saul Todd a couple of weeks ago, and I forgot to ask them. But
so little was known about the Eastern Goldens, going back a few decades, that, if they were being, if they declined because of DDT, it might not even have been known. I mean, if there were fewer hawk watches and, everything, I just wonder about that. And we're just seeing a recovery now. I mean, look at the bald eagle numbers now. I mean, we've seen them rebounding for some time, but it's actually taken quite a few years to see this explosion. And even ospreys seem to be exploding right now. So maybe it takes a while. Red-shouldered hawks is a pretty recent thing.
Well, peregrine, it is interesting that there was a peregrine falcon nest about a mile and a half from where I live on a ridge over Chippewa River Valley. They kept it low key. It's in a protected area of the Steep Rock Preserve. And 3 years ago, they weren't successful. 2 years ago, they were. This year, I haven't heard how they've done. I'm doing my June bird count in my area of Washington, Connecticut. My friend who I was doing it with looked up and said, "Isn't that a broadwing hawk?" And I said, "My God, yes, it was." And we didn't see any red tails that day. I don't know where the red tails were, but we told Larry Fisher about the location, and he found the nest. I didn't go back to see what was going on with the nest, but he did count a couple of young. And it's ironic because further down this same road, about 20 years ago, I had seen, much to my surprise, a broadwing hawk one spring. So it made perfect sense that this bird was in the same area. But there's questions about how broadwings are even doing in terms of breeding in this part of Connecticut, or even in other places in New England. How, what the breeding status of broadwings are in terms
What
of
kind of structure are the peregrines nesting in?
well, it's a rock outcrop on the side of a hill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's
Can I
kind of
ask how many
interesting. Just north of me, there's the first known nesting peregrine since the 1930s, and it was on a rock outcrop on the side of a mountain.
Yeah.
Hey, just out of curiosity, since I got a bunch of people that look at hawks, you guys see ospreys nesting in trees anywhere?
Yes, in central Massachusetts, a lot with dead trees and snags and things like that, very often around a heron rookery.
Yeah, same in New Hampshire. Beaver swamps, heron rookeries.
Yeah.
Here they build platforms for them.
Oh, I mean, like every cell tower, gets its osprey pair here, and they just don't seem to look for trees around here. I've seen one tree nest ever on Long Island. They're just looking for man-made structures here.
Can I ask, is anybody responding to the Fish and Wildlife proposed rule on eagle take? Is anybody out there doing that?
Wasn't the Conservation Committee, weren't they sending a letter?
Amanda?
They could have, they probably were, Carolyn. Yeah, that's one of the very few committees I'm not on, so I'm not sure. I've been following that conversation, Pam.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm not sure.
I seem to remember Brian Wargo saying something about that, and that they signed on to the letter about that.
Yeah, we circulated a letter, and now they've regionally, I don't know if it went out of the state, but they extended the comment deadline to the end of December. So now we're working on, more detailed response. But
Okay.
the data on
I'll
golden
mention
eagle
that
is very, it's like who you were saying, Steve. It's they haven't been known for that many years, like the bald eagle. We don't have the data on them, so it's even worse when they say these companies can self-certify because, yeah, nobody ever saw a golden eagle in that spot. There must not be any there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to throw out a question since I also wear a hat as HMANA's Tours Committee Chair. It's something we've been trying to develop in the past few years, this idea of doing these meetups, Hawkwatch meetups. We've done a couple successfully in the past that are just a chance for Hawkwatchers to interact, much like we're doing now, but face-to-face at a Hawkwatch site. Of course, it's hard to leave your own Hawkwatch site, especially if you're one of the very few people there having to do the counting. So that's going to be limiting for some people, of course. But any thoughts about interest in keeping that idea going for at least the Northeast region in the near future? The last one we did was a 2-day meetup in the late fall at Pac-Monadnock and Putney Mountain. And I know Craig Jackson was on that. And it was a nice group of mostly Northeast-based Hawkwatchers. And that's really, there's no substitute learning about a different Hawkwatch site than going to it and, seeing what you could apply to your own site. So I think there's certain value in it, and I'd love to see it keep going. So any suggestions for locations, time of year?
It'd be nice if there were a couple close together, because it's hard to just go to one place and then maybe you have lousy weather. So.
Right.
Sounds like the old thing for the Northeast Hawkwatch Conference, the old dilemma of, like we would always end up, Springfield or Northampton, Massachusetts. That was like the central location, but, it's still like a long way from the edges, centrally located, but from New Hampshire and New York, it's a long way to go.
It's even farther from New Brunswick.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should do
that. I drove straight through for the last one, right?
And that's true for New Brunswick and New Jersey as well.
I might be interested, but I'm responsible for my 98-year-old mother who's here in hospice care at home.
Oh,
so my days of traveling, maybe a day trip. We have somebody here to look after her, but basically I could do a day trip somewhere. So, Springfield is not too far out of the equation for a day trip for me or that area.
I should mention that we are going to have Northeast Hawkwatch Conference April 1st. If anybody wants to put that on their calendar, we will be having a talk about golden eagles, I think by Nick Bolgiano and a few other, there's probably eight or nine speakers, right, Paul?
Yeah.
It's just a day conference, and that's in Holyoke, Mass. If anybody's
Oh.
wants to mark their calendar for that.
Cool.
I've seen
Yeah.
Nick's presentation on the Golden Eagles, and it's really a good one. So
Yeah, he's a good speaker.
he is. He's very
Um,
soft-spoken. You have to listen hard, but boy, he really has good information.
Yeah,
It's,
and this guy's going to be presenting too. Phil will be giving a talk on
Broadway Hawk,
Broadwing Hawk
nest searching and
telemetry,
monitoring. Yeah.
because he helped out with the Hawk Mountain project here in New Hampshire this last couple years. So we should
That's this year?
probably
That's
what's that?
2023. The coming spring.
This summer and last summer.
So he's asking about the
Oh, the conference?
Conference
The
date?
conference is April 1st, 2023. Yeah.
may as well plug him in.
Yeah, HMANA's 50th conference is not until 2024, November in Duluth. So a little further off that one.
April 1st. Think I can recruit someone to cover my Hawkwatch by then?
Let's hope. It'll be a good one. You should come.
Remember, so years ago, it was decided that would be the good time to do spring conferences because, no one's hawk watching, right? Or even if they are, it's before the Broadwings. But hey, I got my funny little watch with turkey vultures, bald eagles, and ospreys, and that's peak season.
It's always peak season for something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I
then
really
gotta
want to
hope that-
thank.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking part tonight. I think it was a great first start at a roundtable and a great chance to just chat, get to know each other a little bit, and I hope we can do it again. I think it's valuable. I'm looking forward to the next one tomorrow night and then another couple next week. So, they'll all be recorded, so you can I'll either send them out a link to all of these afterwards to coordinators or put them on our website most likely. So you can, check out some of the challenges and discussion items other people are talking about down in, Belize and Colombia and across the map. So,
I guess Trudy will probably put something together for the Northeast Hawkwatch like she did last winter. I was kind of surprised she didn't get in on this one. But
yeah, I don't think she had her gathering this year. I think
well, no,
it's
she used to do one for Hook Mountain, as I recall. But no, she had a Zoom thing for Northeast Hawkwatch in late January or February earlier this year.
Oh, okay.
And I would expect that to happen again. The point being, she
Yeah.
likes that sort of thing, and I would have
Yeah.
expected her on this.
Yeah, I know. Drew registered, but I didn't get anything from Trudy. She might have been teaching, but anyway.
Is- A little off topic, I was
Um,
just going to ask Todd, do you have any new intel on the Stellar Sea Eagle?
Yeah, it's on the north shore of New Brunswick. It's been sighted by lots of birders, and it's got quite a heavy carbon footprint.
No doubt. Anything in the last 2 days? I saw something from Sunday, but
I think it was there yesterday, but I'm not sure.
okay, thank you. I'm just hoping it comes down to Maine so I can run up and see it without too much of a carbon footprint.
Right.
Just look at Seth's profile picture there. You don't have to go anywhere to see it.
Oh my gosh, isn't that beautiful? Great
Well,
photo.
that's now a T-shirt that's available here in the great state of Maine.
All right.
It's a
Yeah,
great
Phil
t-shirt.
has
Yeah.
it.
The North
Common in
American tour.
Alaska.
That's
It's
the
one of
bird.
the best bird t-shirts I've ever seen. It's better than most of the pictures on the internet
That's right.
and closer to life size.
Frank Mantlick here in Connecticut did a talk about trying to see as many birds in a year, and he went up to Maine to see it, and He got to 300 this year. On his year list, and this was a month ago. So I guess he was all over the country, of course, doing this.
Nice.
Great.
All right.
All
Julie,
right.
thanks so
Well,
much.
Thank you all for tuning in, and thanks
Good
so
idea,
much for
Julie.
all you do in all your Raptor monitoring. Keep up all the great work, and good luck with the rest of your seasons if anybody is still counting.